Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I'm going to encourage you to open up the Chumashim that are in front of you, the other red book that is in front of you, to page 99, as we look at the beginning of this week's Torah portion, Vayera. Vayera is actually one of the richest parshiot in our Torah cycle, not only because it's got a story that is easy to follow, because most of Bereshit, most of Genesis has a story to follow, but there's some really powerful and even challenging moments within this week's Torah portion. Right? We begin with Vayera Elav Adonai, that God appeared to Moses. We're talking about the announcement of Sarah that's going to have a child. We have two angels arriving to announce the destruction of Sodom, as well as the fact that Sarah is going to have a child. We see the destruction of Sodom. We see the binding of Isaac as part of this parsha also. There's a lot that is going on in there. But I actually today want to start and focus on the very beginning. So let's look at those first verses. The Lord appeared to him meaning Abraham, by the Elonei Mamre, terebinths. Nobody knows what a terebinth is in English, but Elonei, alon are trees. A terebinth is actually a grove, right? A grove of trees. So there is this grove of trees near Mamre. That's where he was. That's where God appeared to Abraham. And looking up, Abraham saw three men standing near him. And as soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them. Bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought." And we see Abraham's paradigmatic and archetypal hospitality, right, that comes through in this particular parsha. But what I want to ask is, what is different about this particular parsha, or this particular portion, than other sections that we see where God is interacting with humanity? We see that throughout our Torah in a lot of different ways. God interacts with humanity. But what makes this moment different? What do you think? What do you see? Michal? Yeah, so the rabbis struggle. So Michal said instead of interacting directly, God sends representatives, which are people. The rabbis definitely, are these people? Are these angels? Who are they? What are they? What exactly is that nexus, right? How does God interact with us as human beings is a huge question. It's a huge question. We see it differently. We see during the time of the prophets, prophecy, we see dreams, we see visions. Moshe has these conversations face to face. Later on, we're going to see Abraham and Jacob certainly have conversations with God sort of more directly. But there's a little bit of distance here, it seems, almost. Right? There's a little bit of distance. And these three people show up. Okay, what else?
I kind of been thinking a lot about the telescope versus the microscope. And the telescope is God. It's this God is everywhere, like we've already established, and now we have the microscope, and it's the how.
Mm. So we're looking at, I like your imagery. For those who didn't hear, Diana talked about the difference between the telescope and the microscope, right? We're looking at the same universe. We're just looking at it differently, through different lenses, literally. Right? Different lenses. Good, I like that. What else? Please, Joe.
So, this is a case where we're not seeing whether somebody reacts properly or is only in the face of something dramatic, like being told about a flood.
Yeah.
In the very mundane, the everyday
So it's interesting, right? What you're saying is we're not seeing if somebody reacts differently or in this holy moment, it's much more mundane. But you could actually argue that maybe the message behind that is the mundane can be holy, depending on how we act. So I like that. This strange mixture between the mundane, this seems to be a very mundane moment, right? At least the way that the Torah describes it. We're going to talk about how the rabbis describe it in a second. But the way the Torah describes it is, Avram was sitting around, right, at the heat of the day, and he was watching, and they came. They appeared. Now, the rabbis have a little different explanation for that, but yeah.
Well, yes, and if you go back to the last pasuk in Lech Lecha, he was, that day, he and his son Yishmael were circumcised.
Correct.
So he wasn't going anywhere. He was a
Correct.
99-year-old guy recovering from circumcision. So that was a good time for them to come because he wasn't going to run away. He was recovering.
Correct. So, the classic rabbinic response to this, right, picks up exactly as you're saying, Diana, is the end of last week's Parsha is Avraham was circumcised. So he wasn't sitting hanging around. He was sitting recovering. He was 99 years old and he was just circumcised, right? And so he was sitting at the heat of the day recovering, which, by the way, the rabbis say make his hospitality even more impressive. Because he was in pain, he was recovering, and yet in spite of that, he still got up to welcome these guests. Now, who are these guests? These guests are seen as being the presence of God. They're seen, according to the rabbis, as being angels. Interesting side note, our tradition looks at angels, it's a very interesting topic of conversation. We could do a whole class on how we understand angels within our tradition. It's very different than Christianity or even Islam also, who looks at angels. Angels are, in Judaism, the way that God gets things done in this world. They're extensions of God. But God, being infinite and incorporeal, has to find a way to interact with this physical world. And according to our tradition, God does that vis-a-vis angels. And an interesting side note is each angel can have only one mission at a time. So the fact that there was 3 angels here, the classic rabbinic response is each of them had a job to do. One angel was to tell Sarah that she and Abraham they were going to have a child. The other angel was to say that Sodom was going to be destroyed. What was the third angel there to do? Anybody know? No. Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. Because Abraham was recovering, right? So that was one of the jobs that the angels had to do. All right. What's interesting to me also about this particular section is that this encounter doesn't begin with a command. Doesn't even end with a command, right? It is an encounter that is just about the presence of Abraham and the presence of God. And the way that it's framed even, Vayera, is not unique, but it's rare, right? And God appeared to Abraham. Usually we say God spoke. God commanded, right? Those are things we're used to seeing in the Torah. This appearance is interesting. And so what lesson might we learn from the way this particular pasuk is phrased? God appeared to Abraham.
I think there's a lot about something can appear to you, but it says Vayisa Einav, but he literally lifted his eyes. So something might appear, but if you're not aware of it,
Nice.
it doesn't really matter. It's like a message. You have a sender and a receiver.
Right.
And
It's
those two have to happen together at the same moment, because if he hadn't have lifted his eyes, he might have missed the opportunity to welcome them and be sort of the father of Hafnasat Orchim.
Yeah, so this moment of God appearing is something that requires you to notice. And Avraham passes this test very quickly. He notices these men even when you would think that he wouldn't. Take, for example, Bilam, who is riding on the donkey, and the angel appears before him. Bilam doesn't see it, the donkey does, right? But Bilam doesn't see it. So I think you're right, Diana, right? This framing of God appearing requires an engagement on our part as well, as opposed to God commanding or God speaking, which is just, all right, God's voice is there. That's just what happens. So this is an opportunity that we have to take. I like that. It also opens up the possibility that the way that God appeared to Avraham may be completely different than the way God appeared to anybody else. That this is a personal moment as opposed to a communal moment, or as opposed to a universal moment. And we speak so much about God in terms of those universalities, that God is this to the Jewish people, God is this to the world, that we forget sometimes that our relationship with God is based on that personal, individual connection, just as much as it is based on the communal connection. And we see that, by the way, throughout the Torah, because God appears to different people and interacts with people differently, right? With Avraham, it's this quiet companionship. With Moses, God appears through fire, right? Elijah the prophet is a still small voice. There's different ways that God makes God's presence known to us. And we're starting to understand, perhaps, that it's actually quite personal, the way that happens. Michal? Mm-hmm.
Maybe the third thing wasn't before Cholim, because this was just Middle East hospitality is Middle East hospitality, and Abraham was just carrying it out. Maybe the third thing was giving Abraham a hint that God would not really want him to sacrifice his son. Because if you look at later how it said the whole section about the sacrifice is said without any emotion on Abraham's part, that he would go through there. Maybe he had a hint. Maybe the angel told him that
Yeah.
it wouldn't really happen.
I mean, we can talk for hours and hours and hours about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, the almost sacrifice of Isaac, and what that means within our culture, within our faith. I mean, there's a lot to discuss on that. I've heard some rabbis, it's framed as a test, right? It was after these things that God tested Avraham. I've heard some rabbis actually follow, I think, a little bit what you're saying, Michal, and saying that actually it was Avraham testing God as well. Because Avraham ultimately knew God and knew that God wasn't going to have, it wasn't within, that's not what we do. And therefore, the test was sort of both ways. Okay? So I want to look ahead a little bit, because we get this really interesting dichotomy within this parsha. Here we have this moment where God is appearing to Abraham, and Abraham is almost subservient, right, to God, to coming and wanting to welcome these strangers in, and everything that we could possibly give to these strangers, Abraham was willing to do, even in spite of the fact that it was difficult for him and it hurt him, right? He's recovering. And yet, we look not too many verses later, right? And we start to see here, well, wait a second. Now we're looking verses 22, 23, 24, 25. All of a sudden, we see when it comes to Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham takes a very different attitude towards God. Abraham says, wait a second, you can't go do that. You can't go and destroy this whole city. What if there's some righteous people there? And we get this amazing back and forth between Abraham and God, where the relationship almost looks completely different from what we had in the beginning. Abraham here is challenging God. Abraham here is saying, wait a second. I know we have this relationship. I know we have, this powerful connection, and you're God and I'm not, but you're not doing the right thing here. And that's actually what God says. Shall not the judge of the earth judge justly? Or he actually puts it in the negative. Shall the judge of all the earth not judge justly? So, what do we get from the fact that these two stories literally are in the same chapter? How do we bring this together? So what we see throughout this parsha the unique root of to see, right, Vayera, is used in a number of different ways. So we see God appearing to Abraham, but we also have Abraham seeing God and saying, wait, this is not okay. Seeing something that is wrong. And there are a number of different rabbis, and I like this interpretation, that says when you start to use the word to see, as opposed to just the normal words, it's elevating the conversation to a level of morality, to a level of we have to look beyond ourselves. And it keys into this root to see beyond what I'm feeling, to see beyond what it is that I'm doing, but to see afar. And that's how it starts. Abraham sees these people from afar, these angels from afar, and welcomes them in. Abraham sees a different perspective with Sodom and Gomorrah and speaks to that. And it's so incredible to me that our tradition has both of these ideas within the same word. It shares with us, it affirms to us that our relationship with God is supposed to be one of thought and conversation, one of morality, to see the world in a different way. That's what it means to have this relationship. That when God appears to us, it's not just by the terebinths of Mamre, but God needs to appear to us when we see things in the world that are not right and say, hey, we need to step in. We need to be godly in this moment. We need to bring God into this moment. That God appears to us when we are challenged. That God appears to us when we are celebrating. There's all these different opportunities, all these different moments. And that's life. They're all together. They don't divide up neatly. They don't divide up. In the same parsha, we have this welcoming moment where God is everything to I'm going to challenge to, then we get to the Akedah and we try to, as Michal said, we try to figure it out. Well, why he argued for Sodom? Why didn't he argue for his kid? All of that is together. And what it does for us, my friends, is it allows us to understand that our relationship with God is growing, it's evolving, it's in the moment. It's something that we can't just say, this is what the book says, therefore this is how we need to think. We have to each see God, allow God to appear to us in God's own way, and we have to respond to that then in our own way. Abraham responded very different than Moses, who responded as I spoke on High Holidays, who responded very different than Jonah or Esther or any of these different characters. They each had their own relationship, and they each responded in their own way. Any questions